Hey, Hitesh, welcome back. Episode 3, Edition with DR.
Yeah, man, glad to be here. Dennis, I haven't had a chance to actually say thanks for, forcing me into this whole thing, into the podcast thing. It's been a blast, especially after seeing some of the excitement around these episodes on LinkedIn and feedback from our peers. Let's get another one under our belt, man.
Yeah, man, it's been a lot of fun. Forcing you in, we'll go with that for now. I mean, it was partially voluntary. I see though that you're becoming much more what's the word I'm looking for? Movie star-esque with your haircut just before the show, maybe a little powder. You're looking the part today.
Yeah, my wife told me how to dress, so I had to take care of that.
There you go. Good advice. Good advice. Well, hey, man, listen, we got an exciting episode coming up today. We have Eric Toenjes on, who works for Graybar and is an integral part of the Safer Buildings Coalition, which we'll get to in just a few minutes. Yeah, man, we had some pretty spectacular guests on episode 2. Eric Carey and Tarka from Predictive, talking about artificial intelligence, monitoring, how to keep all your wireless devices not only connected, but working correctly, making sure that everything's efficient. And I really enjoyed the conversation with those guys, as well as a little bit of the extra conversation brought to us by Tarka and his expedition.
It's impressive what Tarka has done in his outside of his career, right? Not even within his career path, but outside of his career, it's impressive to hear what he's done, all the mountain climbing and the hiking and the Antarctica trek that he did. And hearing about that is always exciting. I would encourage people to reach out to him to see what he's up to next. From that standpoint, and what adventure is he doing next?
Sure, and Predictive is a big part of what we do, what our industry does, and will continue to be an even bigger part as we get towards these connected cities, smart cities, enhanced cities, whatever you want to call them. Information and the analytics around all of that becomes more and more important. So if you haven't already checked out episode 2, I encourage you to give it a look.
Our episodes are on LinkedIn, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, Breaker, Pocket Cast, Radio Public. Look, just anywhere you look, really.
Great stuff, great stuff. And of course, you can always reach out to us at dishinwithdr.com if you have any questions, comments, or if you'd like to become a guest on a future episode. We'd love to hear from other people in our industry, on the periphery of our industry, or outside of our industry. We're always looking for that, new person to come in here and inform us and keep people interested in the podcast. So, again, dishinwithdr.com. If you have any interest or questions, please feel free to reach out. So, Hitesh, today I mentioned earlier we're going to be talking to Eric Toenjes. I've known Eric for probably 20 plus years. We actually started in the CNS group in the Nextel days together. That many years ago, we worked together on doing in-building solutions for Nextel. I think Eric today is going to bring us a unique perspective on kind of what it was like then, what it's like now, but also talk a lot about Safer Buildings Coalition and some of these public safety codes and how that impacts the building owner and how to handle all those things. So I'm really looking forward to kicking off this episode with Eric. But in the meantime, this episode is brought to you by RK Squared. It's flexible, transparent, on time and under budget, a fresh new approach to in-building. RK Squared is redefining the industry. So I think we're ready to start this conversation.
Let's go. Looking forward to it. As Eric's going to be a fun guest to have on.
So Hitesh, let's welcome Eric Toenjes. Eric joins us today from St. Louis. I believe it sounds like he's at world headquarters for Graybar. Eric, welcome.
Thank you, Dennis. Great to join you guys.
Welcome on, Eric. It's great to have you on.
It's good to see you guys. Hopefully we can do it in person sometime soon too.
Yeah, we're actually going to try to do our first in-person podcast hopefully next week, Eric. So if you after you're done watching episode 3, which is the episode you're on, you're going to have to check out episode 4 and give us some critical feedback on the in-person experience versus the Zoom experience. So we'll look forward to you as an experienced podcaster now to provide insight.
Awesome. Well, I think everybody's about tired with virtual ways of doing things. So it'd be good to get back no matter what to be in there in person.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I was interesting point that you just raised. I was happy to hear that you said you were in the office. That's terrific. I'm glad to hear that. And as you mentioned, it's great for. I think everyone's just about had enough, and it's great that you're able to get back into the office. So, well, hey man, we have busy podcast today, and got a couple of questions lined up for you and stuff. But before we get into that, want to talk a little bit about your bio and who how you got here. So first of all, Eric earned an MBA, and he serves as a national market manager for Graybar, providing in-building solutions, sales execution. He works with the wireless ecosystem, provides all of the best-in-class solutions to the customers that Graybar and their partners support. Eric is also a critical part of the Safer Buildings Coalition and HETNet Forum. What Safer Buildings Coalition brings is, I would say, code interpretation in many ways, code adoption information, updates that help the building owner kind of navigate through the public safety alphabet soup, for lack of a better word. Eric, did I get that right?
Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, there's generally a need for education across the industry, across the people that are making the requirements on building owners and building owners themselves. So it's a big part of what Safer Buildings does, really, is getting out there to educate, to try to create more standardization and honestly a lot more sanity around the business.
Hitesh, you're dealing with all this on a daily basis, and you're kind of seeing it firsthand, how these different AHJs and all these different codes jumble together in the practical deployment or application of these networks. You want to tell us a little bit about what you see out there?
Yeah, so it's definitely an interesting landscape out there. You mentioned alphabet soup earlier, and you said AHJ. So let's break that down. Authority having jurisdiction, right? That's what that stands for. That really gives it a generic translation into any county, any building inspector, any plan reviewer, anybody can provide any sort of feedback that they want, and there's really no consistency behind it. So we were experiencing that across the country. I mean, California all the way to Florida, it's different code adoptions, different ways of translating the NFPA standards, the IFC standards. More alphabet soup for you guys. Safer Buildings plays a huge role in that, and kind of really excited to see what the future holds there.
Yeah, well, Eric, the way I understand it is part of it, national, state, maybe county or municipality, different layers, different levels, different code interpretation and adoption. And, Safer Buildings Coalition is able to kind of help sort through that and understand all that, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, really trying to create more standardization. As Hitesh mentioned, that challenge of having to design every system differently because of the different interpretations of code, it creates a lot of cost for everybody in the industry, and that cost gets passed on to the end user ultimately, right? Somebody's got to pay for that, and it makes the solutions themselves more expensive. It makes them take longer to put in. It creates delays in occupying your building while you're waiting for the occupancy permit. So it creates a lot of problems. And the other interesting thing is it doesn't just happen on the AHJ side. There's a lot of inconsistency in the industry itself in terms of the companies that are providing these solutions. There's no one standard today that says these guys know what they're doing, they're experienced and can do a good job. And so that creates problems on the other side trying to determine who knows what they're doing. And so that's another issue that Safer Buildings is really trying to tackle right now.
Well, we definitely appreciate the help. I know the entire industry appreciates the help, and we'll talk a little bit more about public safety in a few minutes. But Eric, your knowledge of all of this and kind of the approach to two-way radio as it relates to public safety, and also the approach to in-building as it relates to commercial cellular. I've known you for about 20 years, and as I think back to the very beginning, CNS days, Nextel days. What you and I really started in was this deployment of a non-public switch network that was a push to talk, and how we make that work in buildings. And I don't know, talk about that a little bit from the beginning, and where we're at today and similarities and kind of how we got here.
Sure. It's been a really interesting evolution that we've gone through in this business. As you mentioned, where things were 20 years ago, I remember just as even prior to CNS, which was Custom Network Solutions at Nextel, really kind of the group that, to my mind, really invented the DAS business that we all experience today. Prior to that time, what you really had was some cell carriers that were trying to answer complaints from some of their users about their ability to use their cell phones inside of a building, and they were kind of doing little band-aid solutions, filling in gaps with little passive DAS, cover a small area, something that we probably almost look at like a signal booster system today. And so again, they were really just kind of chasing complaints. And what CNS did is really took it and looked at the business and said, how do we go and enable some mission critical uses of primarily voice back then, but a little bit of data, as we're in that 2.5G realm of data access back then. But we were really looking at how can we enable those mission critical solutions. And to do that, you had to have a really viable in-building network to enable that. So it was primarily, as you mentioned, supporting kind of push-to-talk, two-way radio type of replacement applications, a lot of manufacturing and industrial, some hospitality, different things like that. And then over time, what happened is we've all experienced, of course, is cellular use has really skyrocketed. Absolutely everybody has a phone. Back in those days, it was a little bit more rare thing. Now, absolutely everybody has a phone. We're using lots and lots of data. And so we moved from kind of that single carrier dominated world that we were doing back at Nextel and then Sprint, and moved into kind of this neutral host world where everybody was trying to create a multi-carrier environment and having somebody else do it. But what hadn't changed there was really the carriers were footing the bill for everything. And that's really where the biggest change has occurred in the business, I think. You go back probably about 5 years ago now, the carriers recognized, AT&T was spending $1 billion a year on DAS, and Verizon was spending a similar amount, and Sprint was still spending money, and so on. And what they realized is you can't boil the ocean. There's so many buildings out there. After all the billions they spent, we had probably 5% or less of the commercial properties in the US had a DAS in it. And so they just weren't getting anywhere. And so we really kind of went cold turkey at that point. And the carrier said, you know what, we're not spending this money anymore. It's somebody else's responsibility to do it. And that's been a big part of this evolution of the business. It's really changed, for all those integrators that are out there. You used to be able to concentrate on selling to a few people at a carrier. I did that myself in my post Nextel and Sprint days, worked for a big integrator, and most of that business was going through those carriers. And now it's really shifted to the enterprise. You've got to be able to reach out to a lot of different people and go sell directly to that enterprise. The enterprises have had to come to grips with the fact that the carriers aren't going to come and foot the bill for them. You're going to have to pony up and pay for it yourself. And so it's really changed the business significantly.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned way back in the day when CNS first started and kind of being the first, I guess, in-building group in the industry, or organized in-building group in the industry. When we first, right before it was called CNS, it was actually called VPN for a minute, Virtual Private Network. It quickly changed to CNS. But I think back to that because Virtual Private Network, and then where we are today with CBRS coming down and two-way radios, two-way radio, private networks, so when I think back to what we were building at Nextel, because it was, not a public switch connection, it was, the push-to-talk connection was not part of the cellular network, so to speak. And then where we are today, do you see the synergies, and do you think that perhaps your understanding of what's going to happen with CBRS and this public safety stuff starts from, way back then when that was the type of network you were responsible for building?
Yeah, Dennis, that's really, really interesting because it really has come full circle now with the introduction of CBRS spectrum being available. Like you were saying, we were selling these two-way radio replacement type of push-to-talk solutions, but it was all about building that private network. That's where that VPN term came from. And I think that term was going out the window as you and I both joined CNS at the same time. So talk about how far back our our relationship goes. But we have really come full circle here, because the enterprises are now having access for the first time to easily available spectrum that's effectively licensed spectrum. So you're not dealing with unlicensed spectrum like you're doing in Wi-Fi, where you can't really trust that network. The security level isn't what it needs to be. You've got too much interference, all these different issues that CBRS really helps solve. So today we're putting in on that CBRS spectrum private LTE networks. So we're doing the same LTE 4G networks that everybody's using on their phones every single day is now accessible to the enterprise to deploy for themselves. And soon we'll be taking that same spectrum and using it for 5G networks. So we really have come full circle in what the enterprises are doing.
So Hitesh, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was maybe Costanza in a Seinfeld episode said, worlds are colliding, right? I mean, that was, if I recall the episode correctly. I mean, what Eric really just described is private networks colliding with commercial cellular networks, and even, throw in public safety two-way radio networks, the traditional public safety two-way radio networks. From an engineer's perspective, this is like, all these different technologies that you have to consider. How much has that changed the way you look at buildings from an engineering perspective?
Well, from an engineering standpoint, it really is just more tools in the tool belt, right? So the public safety portion of the network is a mandated thing that you have to have. And for new construction projects, they won't allow you to open the building without it. So that's a necessity. And then beyond that, on the commercial side versus CBRS, it's really there are multiple options for the building owner to choose from now, right? So they can choose to go CBRS and do roaming on the operator's network from their own private LTE CBRS network, or they can choose to go the carrier route in the more traditional way and then do a potential CBRS layer for their own data purposes. So there's all sorts of options out there. And so from an engineering standpoint, it's just more fun for us, I guess.
Well, I got to tell you, I today I've invented a new target market for CBRS, Zoom calls and podcasts, because with some of the technical issues we had earlier today with the Wi-Fi, I think a big broadband CBRS private network would have avoided some of that. But anyway, so Eric, again, worlds collide, right? So your roles professionally, Graybar, Safer Buildings Coalition, HetNet Forum. Sounds to me like you're involved in all the different aspects of this as well.
Yeah, I'm definitely involved in a lot of areas, and it really comes down to being able to serve our customers best. Graybar's got a lot of great end user customers. We also work very heavily through lots of contractors, and everyone wants to better understand how to go out and navigate through the marketplace a lot more easily. And so it's important to be involved in a lot of different organizations to understand all the suppliers, the different integrators, who does what well, and what the different trends are in the business, so that we can help our customers figure it all out. When you look at what an end user goes through when they look at this business, and Hitesh, you were just talking about all the different options and things that are out there. How do you figure out what's the right thing to do? It's really a very difficult path for many. And when you look at things that might be holding back some of the growth in the wireless network business, it really comes down to the confusion in the marketplace. And so what I really seek to do is try to help alleviate that confusion, and that really helps to let people make decisions much more quickly.
Absolutely. And, there's actually a lot when it comes to making a decision quickly. There's a lot of things that need to be considered. Obviously, a lot of professional advice or information that needs to be kind of boiled down, distilled down, and really figure out the best overall solution. And none of them are the same, right? One of the things about our business, Eric and Hitesh, is none of these are cookie cutter. They're all unique to the building owner, the business type, the application. So it's fun. I mean, to me, what keeps this industry interesting, what keeps this job interesting, and what keeps us on our toes is there's no one right answer. Every single one is a custom network solution. Hitesh, you want to talk a little bit about how do you keep all of the different options in mind when it comes to picking a solution that puts the customer first. And then Eric, how do you as a distributor make sure that you can supply all those parts and understand the value that they provide, so that when someone asks you, what's your recommendation, how do you keep all this straight?
So on the customer side, it's really just conversation and discussion, understanding what the customer needs are, right? I mean, you've always said it to me, Dennis, as well, but the number one rule in sales is to listen, right? So listen to what your customer wants, understand it. Don't try to force a solution down their throat if they don't need it, right? But still plan for the future and do what's right from an engineering standpoint. And I think that really goes a long ways when you're talking to a customer.
So Hitesh, just to be clear, I only say that between the 1st and the 25th of the month. The 5th through the 31st, it's cram, cram, cram. I just want to be perfectly clear. All right, Eric.
I'm aware. I'm talking about the majority of days with
All
you, right? There's definitely the end of the quarter, the end of the year, the typical sales mentality that kicks in. But
good stuff.
For some of the time, you're right.
E, you want to share some thoughts on that?
You mean by you cramming things down my throat? No, honestly, I don't know that I could say it much better than what Hitesh said, because that really is the core of what we try to do. Being a distributor is a big advantage versus, some other positions, because we do have a lot of different solutions at our fingertips. And, understanding their specific applications, and I like to look at them in terms of what their swim lanes are that they fit in, and that helps to narrow it down for a customer as well. Hey, we can look at all these, 3, 4, 5 different solutions, but here's why this one's the best for you. But you only come to that understanding by really truly listening to them, getting them to talk and open up about the challenges that they're facing, what types of things are going on in their building, the types of infrastructure challenges. They may not have any room to run any more fiber, or cable, or there's no room in the telecom closets, or whatever it is. There's a lot of physical limitations that might be there in someone's facility. There's lots of things in terms of, do I want something that's going to serve my purposes right now and I don't mind upgrading later, or do I need to have something that's a little bit more future ready so that my investment carries on over time? There's a lot of different factors that come into play, and those all help you to narrow down what's the best solution for somebody. But like Hitesh said, you only get there by really listening.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting time, and on the commercial side, the carriers definitely keep us on our toes by investing in new spectrum, investing in new technologies, but ultimately driving new applications and driving new ways to connect things that traditionally wouldn't have been connected, which is really exciting. And just to jump back real quick to public safety for a second, I don't want to make it sound like public safety is any easier. I mean, in fact, Eric, if I'm not mistaken, there's actually 2 different what do you want to call them, pieces or 2 different types of public safety solutions, correct? Code, maybe not code.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point, Dennis. I mean, most people, when they're talking about public safety, you'll see lots of people out there speaking about it in the marketplace. They're always talking about code required public safety. So this is what you have to do to get your certificate of occupancy when you're undergoing a construction project. And that really just dials into the places that are enforcing it specifically to get first responder radio coverage inside the building. And it's really, really important that we do that. It's a major hole in the safety of buildings that responders can't communicate when they get in there. So I don't want to minimize the importance of it. And this is what you hear most of the talk is about that. However, it really only addresses one portion of the need when it comes to communications in the building around safety. And so I refer to that as kind of the non-code required side of things. So first of all, it's not just buildings that are new construction or did a big renovation that have a problem with coverage inside the building for first responders. What about all the rest of the buildings? In some jurisdictions, they'll only enforce it for buildings that are 4 stories or higher or more than 50,000 square feet. Does that mean that every building that's less than 50,000 square feet has great coverage for first responders? Well, of course not. There's many of those types of buildings, or buildings that are under 4 stories. I mean, look at most big shopping malls or hospitals. They're all under 4 stories. So, that's a big chunk of it. What do we do about all these other buildings across the country? Those are not being required by code. But there's other parts, and this is where kind of the cellular world is converged with public safety. And that is, you recognize today that over 50% of 911 calls happen on a cell phone inside of a building. So odds on favor are when in an emergency, somebody's going to be trying to call 911 from their cell phone, right? Inside of a building where there may or may not be good cellular coverage. So it's great that we can get the first responders to communicate once they respond, but they aren't coming until somebody calls 911.
Well,
So if we don't enable that, we're missing a major safety piece.
well, let me ask another question about the cellular side of public safety. Clear something up for me. Hopefully, maybe some people listening. In my mind, when I think of public safety communication, I picture the big radio, kind of the tower, the big radio, the fireman, the police officer carrying it, talking into an open mic, that type of 450 UHF network, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You just talked about 911 being a commercial cell service where, you pick up your handset, you dial 911. In my case, you flip open your phone, you dial 911, and you make that emergency call. But FirstNet, right? Now, this is not exactly either, right? It's somewhere in between. So how does that play into all this?
Yeah, FirstNet's another piece where, by and large, there's a couple of exceptions to this, but it's really not part of the code yet today. It's certainly not an NFPA or IFC codes. You may have an individual HJ that decides they want FirstNet as a requirement for your certificate of occupancy, but it really isn't very widespread. So FirstNet is a nationwide public safety broadband network. So it's LTE. So just like we were talking about the private LTE and CBRS, FirstNet is kind of a very similar thing, except it's dedicated to first responders. And as such, they're like everybody else is getting smarter. We got smart buildings, we got smartphones, we got all these different types of applications. First responders are wanting to do a lot of those things to make their response more efficient and more effective. And FirstNet's a big piece of that. But you can think of that really as another cellular network. In fact, it actually operates off of the AT&T network. So if you put AT&T service in your building, you've at least partially enabled FirstNet. There's some parts that are more dedicated to public safety, but they can revert back to just the regular commercial AT&T network. So putting that cellular in just for AT&T alone, and in some cases, a lot of responders are still using Verizon and other carriers. So you're enabling the various kinds of communication they utilize by putting that in.
So Hitesh, if I understood Eric correctly, FirstNet, 700 LTE, AT&T network. I think it's band 14 is what it's referred to, right? When you're designing from a DAS perspective, how do you take into account traditional cellular, band 14 or FirstNet, and two-way radio? Do they all have to be looked at differently? Or, where does FirstNet fit into that from an engineering perspective?
From the engineering side, FirstNet really fits into the commercial side of it versus the public safety network side of it, right? So the public safety network is your traditional two-way radios, your digital P25, 800 megahertz type network, right? Depending on where you're at. The FirstNet network rides on a commercial DAS, so you have to take that into consideration. Which commercial DAS OEMs provide coverage for FirstNet if you're putting a DAS in, if that is a requirement in that market by AT&T. So that's more conversations, more discussions, more listening, right? And I think AT&T, like Eric said, does not require you to put band 14 into the building necessarily. You can put the traditional AT&T spectrum in, and they will prioritize FirstNet communication over their traditional bands as well. So there's definitely advantages of putting the commercial DAS in even without FirstNet.
So Eric, just to kind of bring that all together, if I look at the public safety or the in-building umbrella, the whole system, we're talking about when it comes to public safety in a building, cellular is important because those 911 calls are going to generate, and the tenants need to be able to communicate. Two-way radio, first responder communication is essential because they're the ones that are going to be coming into the building and they need to communicate. And FirstNet offers a complementary or an additional network where first responders, and technically, if I'm understanding the whole LTE portion of this, traditional AT&T or AT&T users can also communicate. Did I get that umbrella public safety thing correct?
Yeah, I think that's right on target, Dennis. All those different pieces are important, and if you think about it just from your own personal perspective, how many different types of devices and applications do we all use on various wireless networks that all help us to improve quality of life, create more connectivity with work, with friends, have a smarter home or workplace. We've got all these different capabilities. And in the case of public safety, these same types of things all contribute to creating a more effective response that we all want, of course. If we're involved in some kind of emergency situation, we want all this stuff to work flawlessly, and we want it to work quickly, which is really, really important. The more time I struggle to communicate on the phone with the 911 operator is that much more time it takes for somebody to come to our aid. And so all of these things are an important part of the landscape. And like I said before, we're talking about things that right now that are not in any codes, but they're all recognized to be really, really critical to the environment of safety. And so there's things that building owners all ought to be thinking about and looking at. And for those of us in the industry, we really need to be out there as we're consulting with our customers, making them aware. Most people don't even think about or aren't aware and don't realize that people are going to use their cell phone to call 911 inside the building. Once they recognize that, they're like, wow, I guess I ought to make that work.
So, this is, it kind of brings up an interesting point. We have multiple carriers, and no one building has only one carrier. We have multiple public safety frequencies. Many buildings don't have the same. We have FirstNet, we have CBRS, we have all these different, all of these networks to me continue to be complementary networks and really need to be looked at as they work together. And there's not one solution to fit all problems. Agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And you didn't mention Wi-Fi in there, but Wi-Fi is definitely an important part of that landscape as well. In a lot of ways, these different networks help to offload each other so that none of them become overly congested. And particularly, again, we've been talking about emergency situations, but in emergencies, all those networks start getting really blown up literally in terms of the amount of usage. And so having lots of different potential paths for those communications to take is really, really important.
Yeah, the only time I like when my network doesn't work is when Hitesh is trying to call me to complain about something that I said or did, and the old "I'm sorry, I can't hear you," click works well for that.
You're breaking up, Dennis.
Exactly.
For some reason, Dennis is always going through a tunnel. I don't get it.
Yeah. Dennis, you mentioned one other thing there I meant to comment on, but you talked about the multiple carriers, and you and I both spent many years selling a single carrier network, right? When we were back in our CNS days, we were selling Nextel and then the Sprint network, and that all worked great when everybody was using the same carrier within a business. But today, the landscape is such that to really create a safe environment, you got to put in all the carriers. So I get customers all the time say, all I need is AT&T, or all I need is Verizon, or all I need is AT&T and Verizon. And you look at it and say, well, what happens when the guy trying to call 911 has a T-Mobile phone and you haven't allowed for that, right? Or you're sending out that mass notification and everybody with a Verizon phone goes running out of the room because you put in a Verizon DAS, and everybody holding an AT&T phone is going, hey, where'd they go? Right? Well, if they said to evacuate the building, you didn't get the message. So it's really important that we look at this multi-carrier environment because we don't really control the carriers that everybody's going to use.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And actually, I don't know if you've had a chance, or if you haven't, if anybody hasn't, if you check out episode 1, we talked to Ken Senfeld, the president of Solid. And from my perspective, from an OEM's perspective, looking at it from the people who have to manufacture this equipment, with all these different amplifiers, that's a task. I mean, all of a sudden it's new networks, new bands, new ranges of frequency ranges that are well above where we used to be, and it's difficult. I imagine it is a very difficult task to keep current with all that. So you raise a great point, though. You really can't exclude. You have to look at it for everybody, not just a single focus. Well, speaking of that, you provide through Graybar equipment for all different carriers, all different public safety networks, all different solutions, including others, I'm sure Wi-Fi and the like. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about the logistics and demand end of what Graybar does and how they keep current?
Yeah, so kind of related to your question there, Dennis. I mean, and I appreciate you asking about what Graybar does. Obviously, that's my day job here is driving strategy around our wireless business and really helping our customers out. We really have kind of three different types of customers that we try to serve. A large portion of Graybar's business is our contractors. And those contractors are all wanting to get into the wireless business. Some are in a little bit, some are in more than others. But overall, and there's always exceptions to this, but overall, many of them lack a lot of the technical skills that they need in order to really go out and provide a great solution. And so when we look at those contractor customers, not only providing them the right products, as you mentioned, but we really try to help them fill these skills gaps that they have. A lot of times it's partnering up with a great integrator or engineering firm that can provide that technical capability on the back end. We've talked a little bit about the end user customers as well. And if you look at that particular type of customer for us, by and large, those end users are quite confused about what to do, what's the right path to take, who they can trust to provide a great network. And, it's interesting. I've heard for years and still hear all the time that these wireless networks have long sales cycles on them, and people get pushed away from them because of these long sales cycles. And the number one reason why the sales cycle is so long is this confusion that the customer has. They recognize that with this confusion, there's a really big opportunity for them to make mistakes. Right. And when you're confronted with, well, yeah, we need to do this, but there's a really great chance I'm going to make a mistake. It's going to be a big problem. It's easier to just let it go and not make a decision. Right. You probably heard it oftentimes the easiest decision to make is to make no decision. And this happens a lot with the end users. So we really try to help them access and assemble that ecosystem of trusted partners that help alleviate that confusion and help move them to the end. But that third customer for us is the integrators that are out in the marketplace, and these are guys that all really know the market really well. But as we kind of started out talking about this evolution of the market, they went from being able to have a very small sales team that could go pursue a few carrier contacts and go sell to the carriers. But now they need access to the end user, and they don't have the sales teams to go out and do that. In addition, they're looking to, as I already mentioned with the contractors, they're looking to get introduced to those contractors as well and provide their services to fill their skills gaps, because those contractors have access to a lot of those same end user customers. And so that's one of the ways that we help serve the integrator. And then finally, and you mentioned this in your question, is about logistics. And it's an interesting thing, and I spent several years working for what used to be a really large integrator that's not around anymore. But I watched the attempt, even for a large integrator, to handle logistics on their own, and how inefficient it was. And I could probably tell you some good stories there, but it came down to, and most of the integrators are out there kind of chasing the business and trying to react in real time. And it's always kind of hair on fire type of situation most of the time in their business. They don't have a lot of time to think about how they might change the way they go deploy a project and how much money and time it's costing them to do it. So, to quote somebody famous, a lot of them look at it, they're kind of penny wise and pound foolish, right? They're out there chasing price on materials and don't recognize that logistical capabilities that get brought to them. Things like being able to stage material close to the job site, or deliver a product just in time. So you get it when you need it instead of having to store it on site where it gets lost, damaged, stolen, what have you. All these things cost lots and lots of money. And those are the kind of things that Graybar brings to the table. We own our own fleet of trucks and drivers. We've got over 280 warehouses across the country. So we're right close to wherever your project is. And that brings some great advantages to those integrators.
Well, Eric, you mentioned the word integrator as Marvin pans left over here. Hitesh, do you know any integrators? I think you're familiar with a couple. And how do you, what do you have to say about what Eric just mentioned about the change in the integration space?
So I can think of one particularly. I think that was RK Squared is the one you're thinking of, Dennis. They happen to be a sponsor on this podcast. So much, thank you very much to RK Squared. But that's definitely an approach that we've been taking at RK Squared is pulling in the industry friends, the partners that we have to be able to create a new way of going to market and really utilizing those advantages and to be able to streamline a project. It helps us, what you said, Eric, delivering just in time, being able to provide product to the job site when you need it, how you need it. All of that, it makes a huge difference in the deployment of a project.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, I'm going to ask you if you have any closing statements, Eric, anything you want to kind of wrap up with. We really appreciate having you on today. A wealth of knowledge around public safety, a wealth of knowledge around commercial cellular and the history of the in-building space. You've been part of it since the beginning. You've been a friend of mine since the beginning. We've worked together for 20 years now. You happen to live in one of my favorite places in the world where, I don't know, Anheuser-Busch may be headquartered, makes it a very special place to me. But also, anything you have to say. I was trying to remember a few minutes ago, for a while there, Eric, you kind of, you were given the tag. Was it DAS guy or DAS man or something like that? I couldn't remember if it was
DAS man.
DAS. What was it? You go ahead. You tell me.
The DAS man's a little too close to a Seinfeld episode, so we're going to stick away from that one. It's the DAS guy.
There you go.
And I guess I self-appointed myself that title on LinkedIn, and it's still out there, Dennis. So it kind of helps to set me apart and let people know right away if they see my profile exactly the business that I've been in for a long, long time. As you, thanks for pointing out how old I am in this business now, but. Back in the day, I used to work with Anheuser-Busch. We helped change out all of their old radio systems on to Nextel Push to Talk and put a lot of systems in those breweries. A lot of fun times were had in meetings with the AB folks.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, again, man, we really appreciate everything that you brought to today's show. More importantly, everything you bring to the wireless industry. Tremendous asset for the business that we're in. Hitesh, anything in closing that you want to say to Eric?
I appreciate the time today, Eric. Thanks for jumping on and all of your valuable input. And definitely want to work closer with you on the Safer Buildings Coalition side. That's definitely becoming a hot topic in the market. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, I believe RK Squared has joined Safer Buildings here recently, which is great. I know you guys got a lot of experience and knowledge around that place. So I think you'll both benefit from the coalition, and the coalition will benefit from RK Squared as well.
Hopefully the membership doesn't charge per email, because Foley's going to be sending me a bill that I'm not sure we want to pay with the number of questions I have. But anyway,
I will one little more comment about Safer Buildings, if I could add. But a couple of real important initiatives that are going on there that I think are going to have a big impact on the industry. Number one is something called the No Noise Task Force. So there's been a lot of pushback amongst the radio operators, the guys that actually operate these public safety networks, at the amount of noise that's being created by all these systems going in the buildings. And so Safer Buildings has pulled together all these different interested stakeholders around this whole issue to try to go and solve that problem and really create this dialogue nationally around dealing with that, because we want to make sure that as we're improving communications in building, we're not destroying them outside at the same time. The other one is, and I mentioned this before, the inconsistency in terms of industry participants. So Safer Buildings is working with NICET, which is a big certification organization around a lot of things in public safety, to create a certification for industry people in design and deployment of systems, so that when you're working with somebody that carries that NICET certification, you know that you're working with somebody that knows what they're doing. So these are all things that are geared around creating, like I mentioned earlier, some more sanity around the business.
Excellent. Well, thanks for that. And, thanks for Safer Buildings continuing to push the envelope forward as it relates to public safety and keeping people safe, connected, and informed. It's important, and we appreciate it. You mentioned no noise. I have the same policy from about 1 to 3 every day during my nap. I have a no noise policy, very important to me. So I won't soon forget that action. But in the meantime, thanks again, Eric. Guys, viewers, everyone out there, coming up soon, we're going to be talking to some people around third-party ownership and DaaS as a service, managed service. We're also going to be talking to someone from the energy sector, so we're going to step outside of the in-building space and get a customer's point of view on communication, private networks, connectivity, all that stuff. And we really look forward to continuing to bring on new and interesting guests like Eric. Hitesh, why don't you tell everybody where they can see this episode again or previous episodes?
Sure. So available on our website, dishinwithdr.com, YouTube, LinkedIn, and then a whole slew of others: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, Pocket Cast, Radio Public. I think that pretty much covers it. But yeah, we're readily available.
Well, we appreciate the views. I'm still directly aiming to get Governor Cuomo's Emmy moved across the river over here into Clifton, New Jersey, and I could put it right here next to the microphone and let everybody see it. So we're trying to take over that Emmy. But in the meantime, this episode was brought to you by RK Squared, transparent, on time, under budget, a fresh new approach to in-building wireless. RK Squared is designed to redefine. Eric, we thank you for this conversation.